Welcome to the War in Heaven podcast. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth. Today we're going to talk about aspects of our identity and what our strengths and weaknesses can help us understand about who we are, about God, and about our nature and purpose here. So we're basing today's discussion off of a scripture from the Bible. The Bible talks about saying that you're part of the body of Christ. That's not a direct quote, but this notion of being part of a body and of Christ, we're not saying that you're literally part of his body, but a body being a group of people or a community. You can say you're part of the community of Christ. But using a body as an example is interesting to help us identify some of the things this is talking about. So a body has fingers, has eyes, ears, skin, stomach, all these different parts that do very different things. And we see this in our society where society works together and we have what's called the invisible hand that drives our economy. Where if you go to the store and you want to purchase a violin, or you want to purchase some milk, or you want to purchase a hammer, there's tools for that. And a lot of people in America live within a very close distance of all these products. And if you don't happen to have a store close by, you can order it on Amazon or another online place. But all of these different things come through the efforts and skills of people that have different strengths. And so there's some groups out there that talk about finding your strengths, pursuing those strengths at all costs, those strengths helping identify who and what you are. But as we look at the body of Christ example and look a little bit deeper at that, I think that it becomes apparent that God gave us strengths and weaknesses. There's things specifically that we can do well, and there's things that we struggle with, but that we may be asked to do still. And one of the things I don't think the world focuses on anywhere near as much is the importance of weaknesses. And we believe very strongly that part of our spiritual growth, part of our journey here on this earth, is to have been given strengths and weaknesses. And one of the important pieces to understand with a strength and a weakness is that when you've been given it, there's a responsibility that comes with it. In our book of scriptures in our church, there's a set of scriptures called the Doctrine and Covenants. And in there it says, where much is given, much is required. And I think about it often, and I think if you are a super strong man, you're just born with strength, you naturally acquire it, you're very large, you can push almost anyone over. If you see someone beating up on a small person or kind of a more helpless person, I believe that you have more of a duty and responsibility to step in and do something, and that you're answerable to God for use of what he gave you. If you're a really small person, like a child, you may not have the ability to step in and stop a robber or someone else is beating up on someone that's an adult. And so there's this notion of when you have a gift from God, what do you do with it? And we often talk in our world about talents, and we just say that someone's really good at something or they have natural talent. I don't believe that we're just randomly born with natural talents. I believe that God gives us each of these, and it's part of our journey here to say who and what we are. But ultimately, to have satisfaction and happiness in life, because one of the things that we've talked about in past episodes is the notion of depression, anxiety, but combating that through having a purpose, through living life and accepting responsibility. And when we look at the gifts we have and we accept responsibility to use those to help others, we gain purpose, we gain identity. And usually, if we truly accept that responsibility, it's going to take us through and require us to push through and work through a number of our weaknesses. And so we get personal growth as we work through our weaknesses, and we bless others as we utilize our strengths and talents that God gave us. So it's a little bit of the framework that we're looking at as we start today's discussion. And Michael, curious if you want to fill in any more of the foundation or framework that we're thinking about today.
Yeah, just to tie it back a little bit to the war in heaven again, we discussed in previous podcasts about um, agency and what that does for love, how us being able to choose allows us to be able to show love. And I think an extension of that is what you're discussing with our gifts and our talents and our abilities is there's a wide variety of individuals here on earth, and that creates a wide variety of circumstances. Sometimes there's a wide variety of challenges or issues to resolve, and every person having these, you know, different talents allows us to address a large number of these issues and this interpersonal relationship with other human beings. And so our talents and our gifts allow us, give us an avenue for expression of love with our agency. Many people like to look at what their strengths are, and then there's a temptation to look inward and say, how can I use this strength to make myself happier, wealthier, whatever the case may be. It's just focused only on yourself. I'm really good at this thing. I'm going to do this thing for me. But when we talked about purpose and responsibility last week, we discussed how having that purpose and that responsibility brings that meaning into your life. And if all you're doing is focusing on yourself, you're losing that purpose and responsibility to those around you. You're losing a lot of meaning. And so these talents and these gifts that we're given give us that avenue of expression to those around us to show we care, to show we want to help, allow expression of good to come into the world. We express that through our ability to use our talents. We can use our talents for good or bad, but given the fact that we have our agency, um, we can show love and compassion for others with the talents and the gifts that we're given.
Yeah, and it's and that on the aspect of the war in heaven goes back to a fundamental question of, are we willing to do our part, or are we expecting someone else to do it for us? And so when we talk about this body of Christ, one reason it ties into the war in heaven is Satan's plan was to just provide the way, to make it all happen for us. We didn't have to do anything, but there was no life in that plan, no true God type life. There was no progression. And so God gave us this kind of perfect balance, you could say, of strengths or talents and weaknesses, so that our strengths are supposed to be used to help others. And then our weaknesses, as we push through them, it can serve others as well, but that also gives us a sense of progression and meaning as we work to overcome our things, but we're not doing it for ourselves necessarily. We're pushing through those things to fulfill the responsibilities we accepted to help others and use our gifts and talents. But overall, the reason I talked about the invisible hand at the start in the economy was the needs are met. All these products are there, all these services are there, millions of businesses. Um, where do they all come from? Well, they come from people that are, whether consciously or unconsciously, ending up in places where they can do something, or they see a need, they feel a need. And this is similar, I think, to a body, where if you have your fingers, they're not going to do the same thing as the eye. They may want to be an eye, they may want to be seen um, or praised as much, but they're not going to be. And yet, each one's important, has its part and its function. And if one part of our economy drops out, we saw this during COVID, that we start to shut down pieces of it and it breaks whole supply chains. Every part has to function and work together, similar to a clock or a complex machine. If you break one part and take out a gear, the whole thing can stop working. God designed us to function at our highest and best potential as a group when we each contribute and do our part. And so there is satisfaction from serving others. There's life that comes from it. But there's this very strong notion and the concept of where much is given, much is required. When you have a talent, God expects you to use it. He gave it to you to bless others. And we gain so much through giving, but we also gain a lot through receiving. And so we have weaknesses on the flip side where we have to receive help from others as well. This is what creates community. It's what creates life, where we give and take. We're a part of something, and we're not just givers, because it's prideful also to never receive. but we open our hearts up to that, and this is how we feel love. The people I believe that can feel love the best are those that freely give and also freely receive from others. And I remember there's a book, the 5 love languages, or the 5 languages of love, whatever they call it, where they talk about the different ways that people feel love. And I remember, at least, and I could be wrong on this, it was a long time ago that I looked at this book, but it seemed to me to imply that if you want to help someone feel loved, you have to talk to them in their love language, or express love in the way that they feel it. And I remember one day my young daughter coming in to my office. I was having a bad day, and she had drawn me a picture, and all that her 2 or 3-year-old self could muster, a bunch of scribbles on a piece of paper. And she came in and said, "Dad, I want you to have this," whatever she said in her cute little toddler language, "and I love you." And I remember looking at the picture, and after she went out, just thinking, this doesn't make me feel love. It's not one of my love languages. I really need something that, helps me out more than a scribbled picture. And as I reflected back on that, I realized how wrong my mindset was. I was expecting a 2 or 3-year-old to speak in a way that communicated with me, rather than opening my heart up to receive what she was offering and not demanding it be in a certain form. And the reason I bring that up is because Michael brought up love and connecting it to the war in heaven. And on this notion of giving and receiving and strengths and weaknesses, I believe very strongly that when we fully open ourselves up to who we are and are just honest about our strengths and our weaknesses without putting ourselves down or elevating ourselves, we become open. And when we're open, when a 2-year-old walks up and hands you a picture that they've scribbled, you will feel something when you're open to receive that. I wasn't open to receive, and I didn't feel the love that was offered that day. And I've thought about that in respect even to God, and said, how many times have I rejected God's love because I wanted it in a certain way? I wasn't open to what he was communicating. I wanted it in a certain way. And what this means in the sense of strengths and weaknesses is I wasn't being honest with myself. I was looking at my strengths and feeling like there was something, but I was blocking out weaknesses. And I had a false view of myself. And I believe that we become closed when we have a false view of ourselves, when we've elevated ourselves on something or put ourselves down on something. And our job is to really look at ourselves and say, okay, for example, this was an interesting one for me to realize in my life. I felt very strongly I should go to law school. And I never felt I would be a good attorney. It just didn't seem to jive with my personality. I'm a little more soft-spoken. I don't love confrontation, don't love conflict. And so I go to law school feeling like I should. And I was quite surprised to end up first in my class when I'm there. And on the legal work side of things, drafting, contracts, briefs, I can do very, very well. Very good at it. And I discovered a strength I didn't even know I had, because I also had a weakness. There were a couple weaknesses. I stuttered as a child, and so I had gained a fear of public speaking. I also, like I said, I didn't love conflict. I tended to avoid conflict. Attorneys kind of have to step into conflict, help manage conflict, and do a bunch of things. And so I was always torn, going, why would I be good at attorney work, doing the actual drafting side, if I'm no good at some of the personality things required, the speaking side and these other sides? And I learned, and Michael talked about this a little bit, but it's this notion of, well, we have strengths and weaknesses. And together, usually what God's calling us to do and asking us to do will include both. And I believe there's a very important reason for that. But when we can talk about that in a little bit. But it's this notion that one of the things that God does is he'll give us something to have some faith in, so something we're good at, and he'll give us something that causes some fear in us, and he'll ask us to exercise faith and move forward. And we have to choose to develop faith this way, to work to overcome fear, to address the things that maybe we're not great at and we need to overcome and work on. And there's a lot of progression that comes with this, but there's also a lot of this amazing balance to the body of Christ, again, that we can say. And there's this really interesting, I think, deeper aspect to understand of our progression and what it takes to progress spiritually. We don't need to be good at everything. The finger doesn't need to be good at everything, but it has to be willing to learn certain things. But Michael, kind of curious before we move on, thoughts you have or things you want to share along these topics that we've been building on here.
Yeah, what you said reminded me of something I've seen in recent years in my employment. I've worked for places that are very interested in something they call employee engagement, and they try to measure how engaged their employees are in their work. But the idea being that if your employees enjoy the things they do and are engaged in their work, that they tend to do good work and they tend to stick around at the company. And but they ask a number of questions that are I found kind of silly, and one of them is they want you to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 that you are able to, the work you're doing involves the thing that you do best. Because I'm doing something that I do best. And I always laugh at it because I don't feel like some of the things I'm best at, some of my best strengths, are things that I could make a very good living doing. I think I'm very good at some things that don't have great monetary return. That isn't to say that they aren't important or necessary or good. Too often in this life, we gauge value of something just based on a monetary return. You say, well, can you make a lot of money doing that? Is that something that's important to a company or a business? Then it's something we think is important. But we don't look at, great interpersonal skills. Someone might be a great listener. Someone might be someone who's great at receiving, as you discussed earlier, Austin. Some people may be great fathers, great mothers, and that may be their strength, the thing that they are best at. And then to just say, well, if you're not doing the thing you're best at work, then you must not be satisfied, you must not be engaged. And I just find that so odd. I think that you can find engagement and meaning in many things you do, even if it's not the thing that you're best at. You could be doing something maybe you're not that great at, and learning and growing and combining it with something you are good at and be gaining meaning in life, especially if you're doing something based on helping other people. And so too often we focus on, is this the thing I'm best at? That's something that's easy for us to do generally. So we like to default to doing the thing we're best at. Maybe we're comfortable with it. Maybe we like doing it because it's so easy for us. And it doesn't offer a lot of growth. It doesn't offer a lot of scope. If we're really good at something and it's something that we're best at, but somebody is better at that thing than we are, it's possible that you can have a talent that is your best talent and somebody can still be better at that thing than you are. Is your life then unfulfilled because that person's doing the thing because they do it better than you, even though it's your greatest skill? We need to be a little more open to our talents, our weaknesses, and how we can use them. It doesn't always have to be our greatest strength. It can be one of our many strengths that we're using. And it's going to be combined, as you said, with one of our many weaknesses. And we're going to grow and learn and gain more meaning in life as we try to utilize those to help other people. But we certainly don't need to default to the thing we do best all the time and just do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of the finding yourself places, I think, really push that notion of, well, go to what you're best at and just continue in that lane. But what they are doing is it's kind of the simple way to say, well, you must be a really good football player, so just go play football. It's your calling in life. And then what happens often is really good football players will get injured and they'll have a weak body, meaning like they may be strong muscular, but their bones break or different things happen. And there's a weakness combined with it. And then they are left searching for identity for quite a while, trying to figure out, well, what do I do? Why was I given this talent when it's combined with this weakness that took it away? And the answer to me lies in this kind of this dual notion. The war in heaven was about life. And again, this notion of, can we give and receive? Can we be part of something bigger than just us? And in that, the fact that I can do something well and there's something I don't do well means that I have a place. But it also guarantees that someone else has a place too. If there's something you can't do, then somebody else is needed. And if there's something you can do, then you're needed. And even if, to your point, Michael, let's say that, well, if I'm not the best attorney in the world, maybe if we ranked all attorneys and we said on a scale of A to Z, where do these attorneys fall? It could still be what I'm best at out of my skills, but me utilizing it to help people and pursuing the things I am best at can be very helpful to those people. I can help them get through situations. I can help them resolve things, work through things. But I can grow through exercising and working through my weaknesses. And I believe very strongly that God loves us enough to help us grow. He didn't send us here to be the one in all things. And this is interesting to me, this election cycle, as I've been running for political office. It's very tempting for politicians to put themselves out as being the answer for all problems. And what happens in a world of strengths and weaknesses is that our strength can become our greatest weakness, but our weakness can become our greatest strength if we allow it to. And this is a point that I want to hit on a little bit here. If you are a very strong personality and you love to tease, let's say, so you're jumping into a conversation, you always have a joke. That may serve you well in a lot of situations until it doesn't. If someone's mom passed away, saying a joke at that time isn't going to be the best choice. But what happens is we often will say, oh, my strength has worked for me so many times in the past, and I'll just continue to use it to try and deal with the situation. And then our strength becomes a weakness. I see this all the time in business. There are people that have the strength to trust. It's one of their talents. They can trust people. They can give them a chance. And these people, when they go into business, they'll trust their business partner. They won't sign an agreement. They're just very trusting personalities. And ultimately what happens to most of them is they get burned at some point or another. Some don't. Again, sometimes you match with the correct personality, but it's common for a very trusting person to be taken advantage of. And it's because they extended out the sphere in which they should trust too broad. There are some situations you shouldn't fully trust. When people have full access to money, there should be just checks and balances normally. Naturally, you should put things in place. And you can still trust someone enough to access the funds, but you should put in some checks and balances on that so that you have some oversight, so you have some knowledge. But when these people carry their strength so far outside the realm of where it was intended, it becomes a weakness. Another way to describe it is if you have a football team and you've got your big, huge center and you go, you're just the man for the job. You're going to throw the ball. You're going to run the ball. You're going to catch the ball. We'll put you in all situations. It doesn't work and the team won't do well because there's no one body type or even skill type that's necessary for a whole team. The whole team needs different parts to it, just like a body does. And in the same vein, our weaknesses can become our strength if we recognize them, but also if we accept proper help from others and start to create partnerships and different things, checks and balances again, where even the weaknesses can become something that opens people's hearts up to us. when they can see that we're real, when they can see that, yep, I'm not the be all end all. I have need of help. I have problems. Here's what I'm good at. Here's where you feel, you're needed. Our weaknesses, if we become open, again, will bring friendships, will bring companionship, will bring other strengths into our lives. And I think about Moses and Aaron. In the scriptures, we have this example in the Bible of Moses being a poor speaker and Aaron being good at speaking, but maybe lacking the faith to lead or do some different things that he needed to do. And so God paired them up, and they were a powerful team. And we often speak about just Moses, but Moses and Aaron were a team for a lot of it. And they, I'm sure, found support, they found identity, they found purpose through these different things of working together. And I really view ourselves as being the same way. Purpose in life comes through more than just having some responsibility. Purpose in life comes through also having deep connections with people. And those come through being open to accept the help and the good they have, and placing proper bounds around our strengths so we don't use them in too many places. We use them where needed, but then being open to the help from others as we look at that. Michael, any thoughts on any of those things there?
Yeah, just really quick. I've seen in my own life, as I try to look at it from the perspective of a tool, I've seen help in understanding this concept where you can say, here's a hammer, and you generally know what you want to do with the hammer, but let's say that hammer is convinced that it's really good at being a screwdriver. It might try to force its way into being a screwdriver. And I know in my life, in a pinch, I've used the back claw of a hammer on a screw before. Just it fit at the moment. I didn't want to go get a screwdriver. You can make it happen, I'm sure. But sometimes in our lives, we insist on being something that we're not, or that we're not that great at. It's that back to that idea of you being honest with yourself. If we can look at ourselves with honesty and really understand our strengths and our weaknesses, and then we start to gain that meaning, we gain that connection with other people. It's easier to gain a connection with people when you're honest. You say, this is who I am. Yep, I'm a hammer. I don't work well in a situation where you need a screwdriver. That's what my buddy over here is for. But together, you start big connections. The hammer and screwdriver together make great things. And so as we're honest with ourselves and understand our strengths and our weaknesses, it helps to create those connections, and it helps us to gain meaning because we understand what we're good at, what we're not great at. And unlike hammers and screwdrivers, as individuals, we actually can gain new skills. We can mold and learn and grow. And so there are opportunities maybe in the future for that hammer to become more like a screwdriver.
Yeah, and it's an example I've used with my kids too, and talking to them is just talking about the different tools and pointing out that each one has its purpose and we're the same. But again, the fundamental piece of this is you have purpose. The fact that there's something you're good at or passionate about, and the fact that there's things you're not good at, are proof that you have purpose. You're needed. God sent us here with purpose. He sent us here with life in mind. And this purpose, this need, this responsibility, it's associated with life. And these are things that, as you look at your life and you think about where it's at, are you pursuing giving to others? Are you pursuing contributing? Are you pursuing creation type activities where you're producing things, you're making solutions, you're solving problems, helping? This is where your deep connections are going to come from. If you're really good at music, you can do some incredible things to help people feel more, understand more, see more. Music is so powerful in so many ways. And it's interesting. There's a fair number of people good at music in our world, fair number of people that aren't good at music. And I'm one that, I'm not going to play a song currently that people are going to choose to listen to. But that's okay. I have my place. And as we can become okay understanding that we have our place, we have our assignment, we're part of a bigger picture, a bigger thing, and we're part of life itself, it's very peaceful. And we can let go of so many things that we wish we were, and acknowledge that God gave me what I need. If I'm a finger, if I'm a toe, if I'm a knee, if I'm a cell, if I'm a stomach, whatever it is, in the grand scheme of things, it's all important. And something great is happening. And I believe that God is the author of our existence, created it. He gave us purpose and these gifts and these talents that we have. And we don't know fully if some of them we worked at before and we came here. We don't know if some are passed to us through DNA and ancestors. But I believe very strongly that it's not a coincidence with whatever it is. And again, the fact we have purpose means we can have life. Life and purpose go hand in hand. And so as you think about yourself and you think about your strengths and weaknesses, I would encourage you to try and find ways to be honest about them. Some of those are asking people close to you for information about yourself. What are you good at? What are you bad at? And not being afraid of an answer. You have to be very okay with having someone say, you're really not a good listener. Now, I don't know if someone that's not a good listener will hear that well, if that message will come across. But, or just someone to say, you're too abrupt, you cut in too much, you're kind of messy, you're very soft-spoken, you're boring. Whatever it is that's there, take those and understand that that's helping you find your place. And again, God is probably going to ask you to address these things. He doesn't want them to stay weaknesses your whole life. He wants you to work on them and overcome them, which means that your true calling in life, the things you need to be involved in, will utilize your strengths and your weaknesses together. If you're doing something that only utilizes your strengths, you're probably missing out on your real calling in life, because God will ask us to do both, so that we progress, others progress, and we don't sit around waiting for someone else to do it for us. So I would encourage you to take time to think about those. Try really hard to work on the understanding strengths and weaknesses for yourself, and doing so with an eye of saying, where do I need to end up? What do I need to be responsible for? What can I tackle? What should I tackle and address in society or in my family or in my workplace? Start somewhere, pick an issue, pick one that scares you a little bit to work on. It's probably a good sign that it involves some of your weaknesses if it scares you a little bit. And then work on it. And you'll find deep happiness. You'll find a deep meaning to life itself. And you'll start to experience the things that we were fighting over in the war in heaven, our agency, our ability to choose, our ability to love and be loved. These all have to be choices. And the responsibility that rests on us to use our gifts and talents that we have, those are choices. So Michael, do you have anything in conclusion, or anything you want to talk about as well as we ask people to look through their strengths and weaknesses?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well. It's great opportunities for us to build relationships, for us to understand more about ourselves, and to gain and understand that meaning in life. What is our purpose here? There's a lot of things to do, and there's a lot of people with a lot of skills and strengths, and that's why we have so many different strengths, is to tackle all these problems that we see around us. We like to look around and say, how are we going to solve these 100 million things that we can see go wrong? Well, each person focuses in on that thing that they can do with their strength, that they can combine maybe with one of their weaknesses, they can work with somebody else on, and we address them one at a time. One person isn't going to be able to solve everything. That's not the point. we need to build those connections with each other, and then we all work where we have the strength, and we assist where we have more of a weakness, so we can all, find a lot of good outcomes in some of these things that we just wonder how we're going to solve. We look towards, as you mentioned, a political representative. Hey, you go fix all the problems. We want to abdicate that responsibility to somebody else. But if we're going to have good outcomes, we need to look to ourselves and our own strengths, our own weaknesses, and figure out how those fit in and slot in to solve a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. And yes, taking responsibility goes hand in hand with recognizing our strengths, because those are probably a lot of the things we're responsible for. And we'll get closer to those things we're responsible for as we tie them in with our weaknesses. And so hopefully we can put proper bounds around our strengths so that we utilize them in their proper sphere. If we go beyond that proper sphere, they become a weakness where they're not helping anymore. And likewise, if we put proper checks and balances on our weaknesses and seek help, we get connections, they become strong. And you could view it maybe even as, like a carabiner or something. A weakness, the carabiner has a weakness in it, right? There's a spot that opens, but that allows for something to connect to it, and it can become stronger at that point. And I believe our weaknesses allow for connections to be formed, and our strengths also allow for connections to be formed. And we form these chains or these connections, this meaning in life, through the openings we have where we can be open to receive, we can accept help, but we can also give as well, and participate in this grand circle of life, for lack of a better word. So thanks for joining us today as we talk about strengths and weaknesses, and we look forward to talking with you more next week on The War in Heaven.